The story tonight is not that Aubrey Drake Graham exposed his own lawsuit in a leaked memo. That is the version racing around the internet, the version built for screenshots, reaction clips, and people who need a headline to be more explosive than the facts. The real story is stranger than that. Drake's appeal against Universal Music Group is still alive. The record is public. Major First Amendment voices have weighed in, and the argument that is supposed to rescue him is now running directly into the history of the rap battle he chose to enter. Everybody is staring at a supposed leak that has not been credibly verified. Meanwhile, the documents that actually matter are sitting in plain sight, and they tell you exactly why this case has become much bigger than one diss record, one artist, or one ugly week on social media. Because when Judge Jeanette Vargas dismissed Drake's case on October 9, 2025, she did not say that artists can say anything without consequence. She did not say that rap music lives outside the law. She said something much more specific and much more difficult for Drake's side to get around. In the context of this particular battle, in the language of these particular songs, a reasonable listener would understand the disputed lyrics as hyperbolic opinion rather than provable fact. That distinction is the entire earthquake. Drake is not just trying to reverse a loss, he is trying to convince an appeals court that the context of one of the most public, theatrical, nuclear rap battles in recent memory should be treated as if it did not exist. And that is where the internet may have been watching the wrong story. The so-called leaked memo is not the receipt. The receipt is the appeal. The real question is not whether some anonymous voice clip can embarrass Drake for a day. The real question is whether a rapper can go to court after a battle, pull one line out of a larger exchange, and ask judges to treat it like a sober press release. Because when we get to the argument UMG is making about the battle's context, the argument about Drake's own lyrics, and the legal theory that says he effectively invited this kind of verbal combat, you are going to understand why this is not a normal celebrity lawsuit. This is a collision between rap's oldest rules and the legal system's newest attempt to define them. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now let's set the table correctly, because this story gets distorted every time somebody tries to turn it into a quick victory lap. Drake and Kendrick Lamar did not wake up one morning and suddenly find themselves in a courtroom because one song hurt somebody's feelings. The legal fight came after a rap battle that unfolded publicly in 2024, where both artists used the kind of aggressive, personal, confrontational language that makes rap battles what they are. These were not carefully edited corporate statements, they were rap records. They were released into a culture where exaggeration, insult, theatricality, and escalation are part of the language of competition. That distinction matters because this case is not simply about whether lyrics can be offensive. Of course they can. It is not even simply about whether a lyric can damage someone's reputation. Lyrics can travel. Records can define a moment. A line can become a chant, a caption, a meme, a stadium response, a cultural shorthand. Not Like Us did exactly that. It became a massive hit, won major awards, and occupied a place in the public conversation far beyond the original battle. The wider the song became, the more serious the stakes became for everybody involved. Drake's lawsuit against UMG alleged that the label's publication and promotion of Not Like Us defamed him. He also brought claims tied to harassment and New York consumer protection law. The district court dismissed the case in full. The court held that the disputed lyrics were non-actionable opinion in context. It also found that New York's harassment statute did not create the civil claim Drake was attempting to bring, and that his consumer protection allegations did not sufficiently establish the kind of consumer-oriented deceptive practice required under the statute. Now, people hear that and immediately turn it into a meme. He lost a rap battle and sued. UMG's lawyers themselves leaned into that framing, but if you stop there, you miss why the appeal is so important. Drake's side is not just asking for a new chance to argue over one song. His lawyers are arguing that the lower court's reasoning could become too broad, that a court should not dismiss a claim simply because the alleged statement appeared in a rap track, and that an audience can take certain statements literally, even when they are delivered in a musical feud. That is the legal crossroads. On one side, Drake's team says the song made a precise accusation that listeners could understand as factual and damaging. On the other side, UMG says the lawsuit tries to isolate a line from a heated 9-track conflict where both performers made incendiary claims, and that the law cannot pretend the genre, the battle, and the surrounding lyrics disappeared when the camera turned towards Drake. Does everybody understand how different those two arguments are? One side says look at the impact of the line. The other says look at the entire setting in which the line was made. And that is why every viral conversation about a supposed memo risks distracting people from the real pressure point. This case will not rise or fall because social media thinks a clip sounds bad. It rises or falls on context, legal standards, and whether the appeals court believes the
district judge got the balance right. The first visible piece of evidence is the October 2025 dismissal order itself. Judge Vargas did not brush this case aside with a sentence or two. The court examined the lyrics in their setting and concluded that the statements in question could not reasonably be understood as factual assertions in the way defamation law requires. That does not mean every lyric is immune from scrutiny. It means this specific song, created during this specific exchange, sounded to a reasonable listener like the kind of hyperbolic vituperation associated with a heated rap battle. That phrase matters. Hyperbolic vituperation is lawyer language, but let's translate it into regular language. The court was saying that people understand diss tracks differently from sworn testimony. They understand that artists in a battle are trying to outdo, embarrass, provoke, and destroy one another rhetorically. They do not process every line as if it came from a government report, a court filing, or a press conference with a fact-checking team standing behind the podium. And that creates an uncomfortable problem for anybody who wants to make this case simple. If a court starts treating every diss lyric as a literal factual accusation, then rap battles become legal minefields. But if a court treats every diss lyric as untouchable opinion, then artists who believe they were genuinely defamed may feel like they have no remedy. The actual dispute is not about whether rap is real or fake. It is about how legal standards account for an art form that routinely uses performance, persona, insult, metaphor, threat, exaggeration, and provocation all at once. The second visible piece of evidence is the timing and direction of the appeal. Public docket information shows the appeal remains active in the Second Circuit. Significant filings appeared through 2026, including briefs, amicus activity, and a July 14 filing from UMG concerning oral argument availability. That means this is not some closed chapter with a fake ending added by fan pages. It is an ongoing legal fight. The calendar is still moving, the lawyers are still filing, the court has not given the final answer. And that should change how people talk about it. Every time an alleged leak appears online, viewers are encouraged to treat it like a decisive exhibit. But appellate courts do not decide cases based on a TikTok caption, a vague post, or a clipped piece of supposed insider audio. They decide cases based on the record, the briefing, legal precedent, and oral argument. That is less glamorous than a secret memo, but it is the truth. The legal process does not care whether the internet has already decided who looks embarrassed this week. The third visible piece of evidence is UMG's appellate response. In March 2026, Billboard reported that UMG argued Drake's appeal sought to strip words from their context. The label's lawyers said that approach would undermine an art form built on exaggeration, insult, and wordplay. That is not just a slick line from a legal team trying to score points. It is the core of the defense.
UMG wants the Second Circuit to see the disputed lyrics as part of a whole conversation, not as a detached statement floating in space. They point to the broader battle. They point to the fact that Drake had also made severe accusations in his own tracks. They point to the established conventions of rap feuds. And here is the difficult part for the boys' defenders. Context is not a minor detail in defamation law. Context often determines whether a statement reads as fact, opinion, parody, rhetorical exaggeration, or something else entirely. You cannot put a line from a diss record into a glass case, shine a courtroom light on it, and pretend it was written in a vacuum. The fourth visible piece of evidence is what Drake's own appeal argues. His side has said that the lyric was precise, unambiguous, and capable of being proven true or false. The appeal also argues that the lower court's ruling risks creating a dangerous rule if artists and labels can avoid liability merely because the allegations arrive in musical form. Whether you agree with that argument or not, it is more serious than the lazy version of this story. Drake's lawyers are attempting to say that genre alone cannot erase harm. That is a legitimate legal question. But here's the problem. The other side does not have to prove that rap lyrics are never actionable. UMG only has to defend the lower court's conclusion about this record, this battle, this context, and these lyrics. That is a much narrower target. UMG's position is not necessarily nothing in a diss track can ever be defamatory. Its position is that the lower court correctly looked at the circumstances and concluded that this particular exchange did not communicate factual claims to a reasonable listener. So when people say Drake exposed his own lawsuit, I want everybody to pause. The lawsuit does not need a leaked memo to be exposed. The positions are already written down. The court order is public. The briefs are public. The arguments have been laid out in black and white. The drama is not hidden in a Toronto voice note. The drama is that the appeal asks a federal court to draw a line in a culture that has always made its biggest moments by stepping over lines. And oh, do I have more for you, because the part that makes this story even bigger is not the filing itself. It is the coalition forming around it. Some Drake fans are going to hear this and say, here we go again, everybody wants to turn a legal argument into a culture war. But that is exactly what this case has become, whether people like it or not. Because the next layer is not about which reaction channel had the funniest thumbnail. It is about why First Amendment advocates, media law thinkers, and people who don't care about Drake or Kendrick as artists are paying attention to this case.
If you thought the surface story was just rapper versus label, stay with me. We are about to get into the consent argument, the creative expression argument, and the reason the appeal has become a test case for what happens when a battle participant asks the court to undo the consequences of the battle. And yes, some people are not going to like this one because the internet loves to pretend that context only matters when it helps their favorite artist. The first cultural piece of evidence is the continued life of Not Like Us outside the courtroom. The record did not remain a niche battle track. It became a major cultural event. It reached the top of the charts, earned Grammy recognition, and became central to Kendrick Lamar's 2025 Super Bowl halftime show moment. That scale matters because it explains why the dispute escalated from music criticism into litigation. The song did not merely circulate among hardcore rap fans, it became a massive public artifact. But the bigger the song became, the more people wanted to flatten the story. Kendrick supporters wanted the success to prove that the battle had a clear winner. Drake supporters wanted the song's reach to demonstrate the alleged damage. Both sides had an incentive to talk about impact, yet impact does not answer the legal question by itself. A song can be culturally enormous and still be treated as rhetorical opinion in context. A song can be painful and still not meet the legal definition of defamation.
That is why the culture and the courtroom are speaking two different languages. The culture asks, who won? The court asks, what would a reasonable listener understand these words to mean in their full context? The culture asks, did millions chant it? The court asks, was it a factual statement capable of being proven true or false? The culture asks, did the line hit? The court asks, what is the legal consequence of a line landing in a rap battle? The second cultural piece is the way the battle itself became a referendum on rap's unwritten rules. There have always been diss records. There have always been personal accusations, exaggerated boasts, shocking claims, and public pressure. The reason this case resonates is that it forces the culture to look at the gap between what people say they want from rap and what they want when their favorite artist is the target. Everybody loves brutal competition until the brutal competition turns toward their side. UMG's argument plays directly into that contradiction. The label has pointed to Drake's own participation in the battle and the incendiary content of his own lyrics. Again, that does not decide every moral question about the beef. It does not mean listeners have to enjoy every accusation or defend every line. It means that in court, the background matters. If two artists are firing at one another across a sequence of public records, a judge is going to look at both sides of the exchange. And now, let's acknowledge the counter-argument honestly. Some people will say that this framing lets powerful artists hide behind "it's just rap" whenever they say something devastating. That concern is not ridiculous. Art can cause harm. Popular music can shape perceptions. A viral lyric does not become harmless simply because it has a beat. But the answer to that concern cannot be to erase context altogether. The law has to distinguish between an artist making a factual accusation in a setting where audiences expect factual claims and an artist trading verbal attacks in a genre defined by theatrical conflict. The third cultural piece comes from the public reaction to the lawsuit itself. The case generated debate not only because of who Drake is, but because suing a label over a diss track challenged the traditional image of rap conflict. A lot of people viewed it as a break from the culture's normal rules. Others viewed it as a serious response to an allegation they believed crossed a line. That split is why the case has lasted in public conversation far longer than most label disputes. The internet has treated every filing like a scorecard. When the dismissal came down, people used it as proof that one side had won twice, once in music and once in court. But that is emotionally satisfying, not legally complete. An appeal exists because a dismissal can be challenged. Drake is entitled to make his legal argument. UMG is entitled to oppose it. The Second Circuit will decide whether the district court applied the law correctly. Until then, people should be careful about treating every headline as a final ruling. The fourth cultural piece comes from the involvement of the Yale Law School Media Freedom and Information Access Clinic. This is where the story gets serious. The clinic filed an amicus brief supporting affirmance of the dismissal on behalf of the Floyd Abrams Institute for Freedom of Expression and Professor Larissa Lidsky. Their argument offered an alternative ground for affirmance: consent. In simplified terms, their position is that a participant who invited the kind of verbal attack at issue may be barred from bringing a defamation claim based on that attack. Their analogy is sharp. They compare the situation to someone challenging a champion to a prize fight, getting knocked out, and then suing for battery. The point is not that a rap battle is literally a boxing match. The point is that consent can matter in tort law. If you voluntarily enter a forum that is built around a defined kind of aggressive exchange, you may be understood to have accepted certain predictable responses within that forum. Now, that argument has limits. The clinic itself recognizes that consent does not mean anything goes. A boxer consents to blows within the rules of the match, not every imaginable act. In the same way, a rap artist does not necessarily consent to every possible statement just by recording a diss song. But the brief argues that the directness of Drake's provocation and Lamar's response makes this case unusually strong for a consent analysis. Can we have the real conversation now?
how? That is not a fan war argument. That is a legal doctrine entering hip-hop from the front door. And it's exactly why the alleged memo narrative is such a distraction. A questionable leak can make people feel like they have secret access to the story. The court record gives them actual access to the story. One is gossip. The other is a live argument about artistic expression, consent, defamation, and the boundaries of a culture built on lyrical warfare.
Now we need to make a hard turn, because this is where we leave reaction channel territory and step into the machinery behind the story. Forget the memes for a second. Forget who had the better caption. The industry layer of this case is where the stakes become systemic. There are at least three connected forces at work here: label structure, speech doctrine, and the business value of cultural context. The first systemic angle is the label relationship. Drake sued UMG, a company with enormous power in global music distribution, promotion, licensing, and catalog monetization. That alone made the lawsuit unusual. Artists sue labels all the time over royalties, contracts, ownership, accounting, and obligations. But this case was different because the alleged harm centered on the label's release and promotion of a diss track by another artist associated with the same music company ecosystem. That creates a business tension that is impossible to ignore. Record labels are not neutral platforms in the way social media companies often present themselves to be. Labels market music. They decide where resources go. They negotiate partnerships. They build release strategies. They manage commercial relationships. So when an artist alleges that a label promoted material that damaged him, the dispute immediately expands beyond the lyric itself and into questions about corporate responsibility. But UMG's defense pushes back on the assumption that promotion equals endorsement of every factual implication listeners might draw from a song. The company's position is that the record needs to be assessed as creative expression within a rap battle. That is an industry argument as much as a legal one. If labels could face broad defamation liability for releasing and marketing diss tracks that contain aggressive lyrical attacks, the incentives around rap music would change fast. Think about the chilling effect. Labels might demand more vetting. Lawyers might be involved before artists release response records. Executives might pressure artists to remove lines that feel too risky. Battle records could become sanitized corporate products, stripped of the volatility that makes them matter in the first place. That does not mean artists should be beyond accountability. It means courts have to be extremely careful about creating a standard that turns every sharp bar into a potential lawsuit. The second systemic angle is how speech doctrine treats context. Defamation law does not just ask whether words are offensive, it asks whether a reasonable person would take them as asserting actual facts. That test is why the setting matters. A statement made in an editorial, a statement made in a comedy show, a statement made in a parody account, and a statement made in a rap battle can all be heard differently, even when the words on the page look similar. This is where the district court's analysis becomes especially important. Judge Vargas did not announce a blanket rule that rap is a law-free zone. The decision looked at the total context, the heated back and forth, the style of the songs, the history of the exchange, and the type of language involved. UMG says Drake's appeal mischaracterizes that approach as if the judge had created permanent immunity for diss tracks. UMG argues that the court instead applied the ordinary contextual analysis that defamation law has always required. That distinction will matter at the appellate level. A court that sees the lower ruling as a narrow application of existing principles may be reluctant to reverse it. A court that sees it as a broad and dangerous categorical rule may be more open to Drake's concern. This is why the briefs matter more than the viral speculation. The fight is over the scope of the decision, not simply whether people loved or hated Not Like Us. The third systemic angle is ownership of the narrative itself. In music, the person who controls the loudest moment does not always control the lasting interpretation of that moment. Kendrick controlled a huge cultural record. Drake controlled a legal response that changed the conversation. UMG now controls the defense posture in court. First Amendment advocates have entered with their own broader concerns. Fans on each side are trying to define what the case means before the judges do. That is why this has become a narrative war operating on multiple levels. There is the music-level narrative. Kendrick made the more dominant record. There is the fan-level narrative. Drake's lawsuit either proves vulnerability or proves he is resisting a dangerous allegation. There is the legal narrative. The case is about opinion, context, consent, and the line between art and actionable factual statements. Then there is the corporate narrative. A major label must defend its ability to distribute expressive work without being turned into the guarantor of every insult inside it.
All of these narratives collide when you ask one simple question. Who gets to define what a diss track means? The artist who delivered it? The artist targeted by it? The label that released it? The fans who chant it? The media that covers it? Or the court applying legal doctrine after the culture has already made it a hit? That question is the real industry story, and it is why I refuse to pretend an unverified memo is more important than the documents everybody can read. A leak can be fabricated. A voice clip can be edited. A caption can be misleading. A court filing has a docket number. A brief has lawyers' names on it. A ruling has a judge's reasoning. If we are going to talk about consequences, we need to talk about what is actually documented. There is also a deeper irony here. UMG's appellate argument points to Drake's own 2022 signature on a petition criticizing the use of rap lyrics as confessions in criminal cases. That petition argued that rap lyrics should not be treated as literal evidence against artists, simply because prosecutors want to read art as autobiography. UMG now argues that Drake's current position treats Kendrick's rap lyrics as factual in a way that conflicts with that earlier principle. That is not necessarily the automatic knockout punch fans want it to be. Criminal evidence rules and civil defamation law are not the same thing. Drake's lawyers can argue that the contexts are different, but the optics are undeniably difficult. The label is presenting a coherence argument. You cannot defend rap lyrics as artistic expression when they protect artists from criminal misuse, then demand that a rival's lyrics be treated as factual assertions when doing so benefits your lawsuit. And this is where the case stops being a debate about one song and becomes a question about consistency. Does the law protect rap as heightened creative language only when the artist needs protection? Or does it protect the form consistently, even when the art is ugly, personal, humiliating, and directed at someone powerful enough to fight back? The most damaging thing to Drake's appeal is not an alleged leaked memo. It is the possibility that the appeal itself asks the court to accept a version of rap that the culture, the genre, and even arguments made in defense of rap have long rejected. The central tension is not that Drake said one thing privately and another thing in court. There is no credible evidence before us establishing that. The central tension is public, documented, and much harder to spin. It is whether his legal theory can survive the full context of the battle. Read that again. The pressure is not hidden. The pressure is in the contrast between a claim that a lyric should be treated as a factual allegation and a legal tradition that repeatedly tells courts to examine artistic speech in context. The pressure is in UMG's argument that both artists exchanged incendiary claims. The pressure is in the Yale Amici brief arguing consent. The pressure is in the fact that Drake's own past advocacy criticized treating rap lyrics as literal confessions. That does not mean Drake's claim is illegitimate. Anybody who tells you that a lawsuit is automatically frivolous just because it involves rap is not doing analysis. They're doing fan fiction with legal vocabulary. Drake has lawyers. His lawyers have constructed arguments. The appeal has been filed. The court will consider it. But the burden is real. His side must persuade the Second Circuit that the district court got the context wrong, or gave context too much weight, or applied the reasonable listener standard incorrectly.
And UMG's counterargument is built to make that hard. The label says the alleged statements came in a format typified by inflammatory put-downs, epithets, fiery rhetoric, vulgarity, and hyperbole. It says Drake is trying to strip the words from their immediate and broader context. It says a ruling for Drake could undermine a highly creative art form. The company is not merely saying we had a right to release a hit record. It is saying the legal theory itself misunderstands the language of the format. That is the true reveal. Drake's appeal is not only fighting Kendrick Lamar's song, it is fighting the conditions that made the song legible to the public in the first place. The rap battle was built on escalation. The records were built on accusations. The audience knew they were watching a war of performance and rhetoric. Then the court looked at that same environment and said the reasonable listener would not hear the disputed lines as factual allegations. So the real question is, can Drake separate the lyric from the battle strongly enough for an appellate court to view it as fact? Or will the court agree that the battle is inseparable from the lyric? That is the point nobody can solve with a leaked clip. That is the point that determines whether the dismissal stands. One person made a record that became a cultural event. The other made a legal argument that now has to explain why culture should be ignored. That is not a diss. That is the structure of the case.
And this is where Kendrick Lamar's role becomes almost secondary, even though his record sits at the center of everything. Kendrick does not need to keep revisiting the lawsuit in public for the story to continue. Not Like Us already did its work in the culture. It became a chart-topping record, it received Grammy recognition, it made it to the Super Bowl stage. Those are documented outcomes, not rumors. The song's legacy is no longer dependent on a new post, a new interview, or a new round of public sparring. Drake, meanwhile, is still trying to change the legal interpretation of the record. That does not erase his career, his catalog, his reach, or his importance to music. It does mean he is in a more complicated position than a simple fan war narrative can admit. He's asking the system to make a judgment about a form of expression that many artists, including Drake himself in other contexts, have argued deserves careful protection from literal-minded interpretation. The right person is not necessarily winning because fans made louder memes. The right principle may be winning if the court preserves room for art to be art while still recognizing that context has consequences. That is the adult version of this story. It is less satisfying than calling somebody a loser. It is more important than pretending a viral rumor is a legal exhibit. Because discipline is not only about who drops the better song, it is about refusing to let the facts become optional because the headline would perform better without them. Kendrick's documented cultural run speaks for itself. Drake's documented legal appeal speaks for itself. UMG's documented response speaks for itself. The court's dismissal order speaks for itself. We do not need to invent a secret voice note to make this story compelling. The actual record is already wild enough. And if you have made it this far, you understand why I keep saying the memo is not the story. The story is that a federal appellate court is being asked to decide how the law reads rap battles. That decision may not make a single person dance, but it could matter for artists, labels, writers, and creators long after this particular feud is reduced to old clips and playlists. This is only the start. Watch for the oral argument schedule in the Second Circuit, because that is where both sides will have to answer judges' questions in real time, without the protection of a carefully edited social media post. Watch for any ruling that explains whether the court embraces the district judge's contextual reasoning, narrows it, or sends part of the case back for further proceedings. And watch the amicus discussion, because the more people outside the immediate feud frame this as a creative expression case, the more the outcome will be read as a precedent rather than a celebrity scorecard. Stay locked in, because the next development is not going to be decided by whoever posts the loudest alleged leak. It is going to be decided by filings, arguments, and whether the court believes a rap track can be separated from the battle that created it. And the next video you need to watch is the one where we break down the strangest contradiction in this entire saga. How rap lyrics went from being defended as art when prosecutors tried to use them against artists to becoming the center of a civil argument over whether a rival's bars should be treated as literal fact. That is not just another Drake versus Kendrick episode. That is the part that could change how every major rap controversy gets argued from here forward.